Yo, yo, yo. What it do, chicken stew, y'all? It's the coppercoloredking. We back in this bad boy with some more good content. And today, we gonna cover some of the mysteries of the old world. We're gonna switch off from that Indian talk for a little while. We're gonna sway away from our history of South Carolina segment, because that one, we gonna conclude that one with a bang. When I say bang, you're going to think that bad boy got hit with an M80. Or whatever the name of the missiles is that come out of the rockets. Right, in this one, we're going to talk about the mysteries of the old world. Monsters in the old world. Homo monstrous, griffins, giants, pygmies, dog-headed men. People with faces on their chests. Giants. Again, right? Petrified peoples. Things that have existed in the great past, but is spoken about today as mythology. Right? They have introduced it to us as mythology. Right? And I always give props to Disney because they do a great job at exposing this mythology. Right? Let's dive right into it for a second, right? So real quick, before I even get into the article, right? When I say do a great job at exposing mythology, this is exactly the type of stuff I'm talking about. The movie Moana. This movie was so dang good. I watched it 15 times. Really trying to comprehend what I seen before my eyes. The last time Disney did something like that, to my imagination, was when they dropped the Atlantis movie. And once they left out of the city of Atlantis, they got back to their submarine or home base, whatever, and Sun paid them mad gold just so that they won't say anything. Right? Just off the gate, just letting us know, like, this is how things work in this world. A lot of that stuff was real. But they hide it now behind the camera and they call it entertainment. We're going to entertain you. Make it nonfiction. Call it mythology. Give you no reason to believe in it whatsoever. And leave you dwelling in a world full of unrealistic imagination. Right? If you could think of it, but it had to exist at some point. That's my perspective now at this point. But why do I say Moana, right? There is a point in the movie where they have this island that turns into a person, right? Technically a giant. And if you look at Te Fiti today, and I swear Google better not have took that picture down, or Tahiti, it is legit the same exact shape as that petrified human. So it just blew my mind. I'm like, yo, Disney really put this in a movie and nobody stopped to ask or think, like, yo, could this be real? Check it. Disney put that in a movie. I want people to understand the Pacific Islands is so much history over there. Most of it is beneath the water, but there's so much history over there. Right? It just had me like, you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised at this point. Then I read articles like this. Homo monstrous. An article published by Anne Marie de Wild Medfehit. And in this article, they talk about the monstrous tribes that were believed to inhabit actual lands, principally or mainly India. Among the foreign peoples described by the great Herodotus, Ctesias, and Megathenses are the one-eyed people, aka the Bellamy, or headless ones. The long-eared Phoenicians, big-lipped people, the Seapodes, and the goat-footed people, later called satyrs. Right, these were published in 1493. These images. Like, I'm not gonna lie, if I would have seen any of this back in these days, or if I see any of this today, I might just start tripping. I'm not gonna lie, cause like what? Especially this one. This one would take me out. Like, yeah, big ass feet. But according to Herodotus, these people actually lived and dwelt with modern man, hand side by side with modern man. And then it makes me think, there's a lot of people that have, and I'm not gonna say this in a bad way, but like certain deformities that'll make you think like, yo, where'd that even come from? Like, I'm not gonna lie, I ask that question all the time. Like, how do these things come about? And then you learn about stuff like this, like, well, it had to be somewhere down in the bloodline, right? And we already learned in history that there were some factions or branches of modern man who were interbreeding with these people who would not be considered mankind, aka, for example, the wild men, right? People interbred with the wild men, the Neanderthal. And this is why Neanderthal DNA, some of that DNA was passed through man. His folks in them was interbreeding, sin, haram. But yeah, according to Herodotus, these monstrous tribes of peoples existed. So we're going to go into this right here for a little. We're going to read this article and see what they got to say. We're going to make some connections to some other books that I've read, just to prove a point, by the way, just to show people how true this stuff really is. All right, let's tap in. So what does it say? When Carl von Linnaeus worked out his monumental classifications of natural things in the 18th century, he included the species Homo monstris. Right, Homo monstris being outside of Homo sapien. Now check this. One of the people that they're going to class under this Homo monstris are wild men. We learned that the wild men are Neanderthals. There's several other things that we learned about the wild men, but we're going to save it because I'm going to make the connection. Let's continue. By Homo monstris, he meant a species related to Homo sapiens, but marked different in physical appearance. To do Linnaeus full justice, he was quite aware that there were men on all continents who belonged to the species Homo sapiens. He nonetheless believed, as many of his contemporaries and predecessors did, that in remote areas there were man-like creatures with weird characteristics. The belief in the existence of monstrous races had endured in the Western world for at least 2,000 years. In the Western world, right? That's here in America. They believed in these monstrous races for 2,000 years. A lot of them existed. The tribes have stories about this stuff, and they've been here for longer than 2,000 years. Let's continue. During that time, a rich assortment of semi-human creatures were described by explorers and travelers, whose accounts were probably based largely on malformed individuals and the desire to enhance their own fame at home. No part of the human body was neglected. Each was conceived as having elaborate variations. There were, for example, people with tiny heads, with gigantic heads, and with pointed heads. Cone-headed people. This kind of reminds me of the Yakub The Yakub story, for those people who don't know, they got the Yakub. That's like the African mad scientist, right? He's a figure in the mythology in the Nation of Islam. He was a black Meccan scientist who lived 66,000 years ago and created the white race. This is according to the Nation of Islam, their mythology. Yakub, these teachings come from the Nuwabian nation, for those who don't know. Nuwapu, that stuff. If I'm not mistaken, the leader of it, he built a temple here in America and then got arrested. I forgot his name, because I knew his name. Oh yeah, Dr. Z York. Dr. York. Or York Z, one of them. But yeah, that was a lot of his teachings and stuff. And in these descriptions, you got cone-headed people, big-headed people, wild different stuff like that. So even there lies a connection. They telling us right now is tiny heads, big heads, gigantic heads, dog heads, people with detachable heads, with horse heads, with pig snouts, and with bird beaks. Right? People with pig snouts and with bird beaks. Is that why a lot of the elite wear masks and stuff like that today, to pay tribute to a lot of these monstrous creatures? Right? In the absence of knowledge about faraway places and about the limits of human variation, men populated them with creatures of their imagination. At the same time, there were efforts to explain how such strange beings could have originated and what was responsible for their extraordinary characteristics. Like, who was responsible for this? Who built you niggas? Right? Why are you built like that? Right? Homo monstrous. Thus, in the rise and decline of Homo monstrous, one encounters ideas and attitudes that hold much interest for the modern anthropologist. The credulousness of those who accepted the reality of monstrous peoples is not so very different from the unfound prejudices that human groups often harbor toward one another today. Right? Alienating the monsters, like how they alienate people, how people alienate each other today. And one of the major tasks of anthropology is to clear away misinformation that may lead to such misunderstanding. Among the earlier writers on fabulous peoples was the Greek historian Herodotus. In the 5th century BC, he traveled widely in the world. He came to America that was known to him. He was fairly objective in his accounts of the nearby Egyptians and Persians. And he certainly did not believe everything he was told. In lands far from home, however, people and their habits often appear more unusual. As Herodotus wrote, the ends of the earth produce the things that we think most fair and rare. Thus, he reports that in Ethiopia near the Egyptian border, a tribe called the Troglodytes live underground. Again, more teachings coming from Nuwapu, because in this itself too, they teach about people who lived underground, who came from underground to overthrow the people who lived above the ground. Right? A lot of that stuff has to do with this Nuwapu teachings and stuff like that. But we also hear about that stuff today. People who live underground. Right? Herodotus is saying that there were people who lived in Ethiopia. They called them the troglodytes. The troglodytes. They ate snakes and lizards, and their language resembles the screeching of bats. Sounding pretty reptilian to me themselves. And then near the Atlas Mountains lived the Atlantes. People who were unable to dream. So you got people named or called the Atlantes who live near the Atlas Mountains. For those who don't know, well, let's just say that the Atlas Mountains, and I don't care what people say, there's a connection between the Atlas Mountains and the lost city of Atlantis. Even though we have connections over here in America, those can be more proven than the Atlas Mountains connection The question is, why does it even have that name? Atlantis. Right? There's a connection with that. But they had people named the Atlantes, and they lived near the Atlantis Mountains. They were unable to dream. But it seems like a pretty much a 90% human thing to me. I mean, not being able to dream. I can only imagine how many nights. I mean, I can't imagine. I can count on, if I had 3 fingers, how many days I dream out of those 3 days. Or out of my 10 fingers in a week, I can count on my hands how many days I dream. I really don't dream like that. And I don't know. I'm different from other people. You know, other people do dream, but it's not about us. This is about them. That's pretty much a close to human thing, though. I won't consider them monsters because they couldn't dream. Very interesting, though. The Indian Pade consumed their fellow men as soon as they showed the slightest sign of illness. Cannibalism, right? Very monstrous. The Libyan Adermachi Day, after catching a flea on their person, give it a bite for bite before throwing it away. These people near Libya ate flies. Right? That is very filthy, not gonna lie. If human habits could be so strange, it was perhaps not surprising that physical differences also existed. This is where it gets interesting. Herodotus reports that the Agrippidae across the River Don are totally bald. In the mountains of the same region, so the bald men told him, are a goat-footed race of men, and another group that sleeps 6 months of the year hibernating like bears or like animals. Right, this is also something like cavemen, right? Staying in the caves. Goat-footed men. Animal men. Living in the caves, living in the mountains. I don't believe it, Herodotus comments, yet he continues. He describes the Arimaspi, who have only one eye situated in the middle of their forehead, Cyclops, and the Griffons, half lion, half eagle, that guards hordes of gold. Oh, big drop. Because what did I tell y'all? The Griffin was the symbol of Tartaria, right? The Griffin was the symbol of Queen Khalifa and them. The Golden Horde valued the Griffin. So why did the Golden Horde, those people, or these Mongols and Tartars, why did they value the Griffin? Why was the Griffin so important in their culture? Maybe because the Griffin was the guardian of the gold? Protect the monarchy? Maybe that was a real thing, as told by Herodotus? Right? He writes that according to the Libyans, their region has dog-headed men like Anubis, headless people with eyes in their chests, wild men and wild women, and many other monstrous races. Wild men and wild women and many other monstrous races. Now, this is the part that I said was going to be important. They classify wild men and wild women under Homo monstrous. Wild women and wild men are Neanderthals. Right? Neanderthals are them folks. We learned in our research that, and this is from the history of the Lost Continent of Mu book, highly civilized races struggled through catastrophes. These races were in existence and in a highly civilized state tens of thousands of years before the glacial period and the European Pleistocene ape man, the wild man. These wild men, Neanderthals and their descendants, are not of mankind. Herodotus And these other philosophers or important people, historians, are making it known for us right here. These people who came out the caves are not human. They are not human. Man versus mankind. Again, this is from the History of the Mound Builders book. What does it tell us? Well, it says, it is a theory that with some that the Paleolithic man of Europe migrated through northern Asia and it survives in the Eskimo of the present. These Eskimos are connected back to these European Paleolithic ape men, Pleistocene ape men. So if these Eskimos, who technically are connected to Siberians, are now connected to these Neanderthals and wild men, then that kind of tells us something about the modern Native Americans of today, right? Because there's a connection with all these people. None of them are of man. This is mankind. We existed long before them. We walked this earth before them, and we walked this earth side by side with them. These same wild men were also giants in the Americas. They were giants, and what they did was they ate people and they bit trees. And they were all throughout the Americas. Right? Now we getting into it. There's a connection with all of this stuff. All right, let's continue reading because we're going to go crazy. It may be that Herodotus actually heard such stories in his travels. But it should be noted that other Greeks of his time were acquainted with similar fabulous tales. Not just him, but many other people. Several centuries before, Herodotus the poet Hesiod had mentioned one-eyed, dog-headed, and breast-eyed tribes. Homer wrote about the one-eyed Cyclops and about giants and pygmies, which can also be found here in America. The epic poet Aristeas spoke of the one-eyed Arimaspi. Herodotus thus did not invent the monsters. He was rather the first to locate them in actual geographic areas. Told you, we got giants, we have ancient races of pygmies here in the Americas, along the northeastern coast, right, all over. Let's just see if they talk about it in this one. Okay, not even. But yeah, giants, pygmies, little people, all that here in the Americas. So again, he was able to locate them in actual geographic areas. Why was this? Because, well, he traveled a lot. The boy got around. Right? He was one of those people who knew that Egypt was here in America. Right? The Greeks knew that surrounding them were people with cultures quite different from their own. This may have made it easier for them to accept the monstrous races as a reality. AKA, you know what? Let's just start living hand in hand with them. There was at least one Greek theory of evolution that could account for the existence of hybrid creatures. Empedocles, a contemporary of Herodotus, held that parts of men and animals arose separately and independently. Hands wandered without arms, feet without legs, and heads without trunks. These isolated parts combined at random, so that they could be animals with human heads or man-like creatures with the features of animals. Although in time only favorable combinations survived, peculiar ones can still be found. Soon after the death of Herodotus, reports about India added to the credibility of monstrous races. At the beginning of the 4th century BC, Ctesias, who had once been a physician at the Persian court, wrote that India was populated by many wondrous tribes who had a single large foot on which they can hop faster than any biped by any two-footed person or thing. Right? That had to be one big ass foot. That's these people that they talking about right there, holding his big stinking foot. Right? They made further use of this appendage by employing it as a kind of umbrella, holding it over their head for protection against the rain or the heat of the sun. Right? Holding your foot up to block it from sun and rain is crazy, I ain't gonna lie. But right, this is what makes us different. The cynocephalia, or dog-headed ones, were said to bark rather than to use words. The blemye were headless, with their face between their shoulders. There were people with ears so long they covered their arms as far as their elbows. Others had long and very hairy tails. Still others had 8 fingers on each hand and 8 toes on each foot. Right? These are very different groups of people being described by these historians right now. Right? Like, yo, these folks is really out here holding their feet up, blocking the rain. Footbrella. Right? Similar reports about India came from Megasthenes, the learned ambassador of the Babylonian king Seleucus I. Having served at the Indian court of Shangupta, he added some new examples to the older ones and was the first to give currency to the table of certain Indian nomads who had no nose but only small holes for nostrils. Right? A no nose and holes for nostrils is crazy. He spoke of Ceopodes whose feet pointed backwards, and of the happy Hyborians whose lifespan was 1,000 years. The Phoenicians, he said, had ears so long they slept in them, with one ear serving as a mattress and the other as a blanket. Nah, that's crazy, right? This is what I'm saying to y'all. Think about that. Think about just walking down the street and you seeing people who look like this. Right? This is straight up mythology. Something that you would only find in a cartoon. Right? Cartoons do a pretty job, as a matter of fact, as bringing these things to life. Okay, where were we? There were also Indian tribes that had dog ears or had an upper lip extending below the chin or had no mouth. The last, being unable to eat, subsisted on the odor of roast meat and fruit and the perfume of flowers. The invasion of India by Alexander the Great in 326 BC probably gave rise to similar reports. With Alexander's army were scholars charged with describing the countries through which they passed. Most of these writings have been lost, but the romance of Alexander, which most scholars date back to 200 BC, was translated into many languages in the early Middle Ages. Together with the work of Megasthenes, it was for centuries an important source of knowledge about the real and imaginary inhabitants of India. Right? One book, right? The Romance of Alexander, that talks about these mythologies, right? Again, something that can be considered fiction, but tells the truth. Right? A number of learned Greeks challenged the stories about monsters. The geographer Strabo, who lived at the time and birth of Christ, did not hesitate to call such tales mere superstition. Nonetheless, the tradition remained vigorously alive. In the 1st century AD, the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder devoted several volumes of his encyclopedia, Historia Naturalis, to descriptions of the physical nature and manners of mankind. Now, again, we're going to go into importance of some of these things. What do I have? We have Pliny's Natural History. We have the book. We have the book. So that's why I said this series is going to go crazy, because we're going to talk about way more than what we learning about right now. These so-called Homo monstrous right here. Pliny's Natural History. We got the book. So stay in tune, man. Get these subscribers up. Keep liking. Keep subscribing. And let's get these videos to 1,000 plus. Just to run it up, man. Let's do it. But yeah. In the book, they have descriptions of the physical nature and manners of mankind, asserting that he had read more than 2,000 books. Pliny repeated in a systematic manner all that had been said about monsters. He also had added a few embellishments of his own. Some later commentators remarked that a more appropriate title for these writings would have been Unnatural History. Pliny's contributions included the cannibal Scythians, who used skulls for drinking vessels. We know the Scythians actually were cannibals, though. They were pagans. So they partook in a lot of stuff, right? The Thebae, who had a double pupil in one eye and the image of a horse in the other. And the solitary Essenes, who lived without women and yet propagated. Other Roman writers such as Pompeius Mela and Cassius Julius Solinus elaborated on Pliny. The ears of the Phoenicians and the feet of the Sapodes grew larger and larger. In the land of the Nuers, the men were transformed into wolves in the summer, werewolves, Twilight Zone, and then regained their human form in the winter. Werewolves. Man, they put this stuff in the movies. Right, and this is why we're going to read Pliny's Natural History, man. We're going to start this one off. We're going to go out with a bang with the first chapter. The first chapter goes out with a bang, but you know what? We're going to save it. We're going to save it. We're going to save it for the series. Werewolves, right? Following the exact scheduling on when these things actually happen, right? These writers were important sources for the medieval acquaintance with monsters. Belief in the reliability was bolstered by reports of travelers and missionaries that were written with apparent sincerity and conviction. And what do we have here? Right? Ostrich men and werewolves, right? This is a werewolf. The left is shown a cynocephalia, or dog-headed one. Also believed to inhabit India. They were often assigned allegorical roles, at one time signifying harshness of temper, at another meekness. The goose-headed man shown at the right and others like him were depicted on printed pamphlets that sold well at 17th century county fairs. The woodcuts are reproduced from Monstrum Historia, published in 1642. Monsters, people that could have existed, yet they using these things on pamphlets and stuff for leisure, for entertainment. Right? Same stuff they put in the movies now. This one was interesting to me because this is like one of the Hindu gods. Right? But let's see what they say. Monstrous races presented a problem for the early church fathers. It was difficult to deny the reality of such creatures, not only because of the missionaries' reports, but also because of the Bible. Right? The book of Genesis refers to races of giants. Right? It was difficult to deny the reality of such creatures because in the Bible itself, they talk about giants. A passage in St. Jerome's translation of Isaiah reads, "And the hairy ones shall dance there." Not only that, they told us who was one of the mighty hunters. Nimrod was a monster, a wild man, right? Say Jerome's own commentary explained that the hairy ones might be wild men. They talk about them in the Bible. Right, but hey, again, man versus mankind. They not like us. In the City of God, St. Augustine dealt with the question of the reality of such beings. He wrote, the stories about monsters are not plain lies. Such beings either are not men at all. They are not men at all. They are not. If they are men, they are like other men, descendants of Adam. St. Augustine tended to favor the last possibility. He argued that individual monstrous births do occur and are clearly descended from Adam. Monstrous races might therefore exist and be human. Well, we know not everything that came from Adam was human. Right? Noah was scared of his own father. Right? Reasons being, check out my videos, man. Later, medieval scholars asked themselves how such transformations could have taken place. A common answer was that the devil had so perverted the souls of some pagans that their parents had also degenerated. Who's to say that's not true? Who's to say that that's not true? Again, Nimrod. His soul was perverted. According to legend, Nimrod turned into an animal. Why was this? Why was this? He was rebellious against God. He tried to make people rebellious against God. He used to sacrifice animals to the Most High. He was made into an animal. He was not human. Nimrod was not human. So again, the devil had perverted his soul to the point of what? He behaved like an animal and then had to regain his consciousness when he realized the power of the Almighty. Amazing, right? Sorry, not Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar. Right? They say it right here. Scripture could be invoked to prove that such changes were possible. The evil king Nebuchadnezzar had been transformed from a man into a beast-like creature. His hair grew like an eagle's feathers. His nails were like a bird's claws, and he ate grass. Right? Again, the devil perverted his soul. He was transformed into an animal, not of man. Right? Other commentators, he was of man and was transformed into mankind due to the perverting of the soul. Other commentators who were less strict about the concept that man monstrous or otherwise, had a single origin, advanced the idea that monsters might have been separately created by the devil in an effort to confound God's creation of man. It was also deemed possible that monsters were creatures of the antipodes who had managed to climb up over the edges of the flat world. Right, but many people don't understand the devil is of God's creation as well. Right, so all of these things can be of God's creation. There's just what separates and differentiates us, man from mankind. There is a difference. Right? If God created the devil and the devil created these rebellious people, then they were created to rebel against God. Because the devil ain't no rebelling against God. Ain't something he could do alone. You're going to need an army. Right? If we would make this theory make sense. Right? But this is according to other commentators who existed around that time, other historians who used to roll with them Greek folk them. Right? But this is when they believed that the world was flat. Right? Meanwhile, medieval travelers' study made the monsters more monstrous. There were peoples with 1 eye, 3 eyes, or 5 eyes, with eyes in the backs of their heads, with 4 more arms and legs with enormously long teeth. There were others without nostrils, without eyes, without a mouth, or with their mouths so small they can only drink through a straw. Right? Imagine that. Some had ears so long they hindered walking and had to be knotted together behind the back or wound around the arms. Some had ears shaped like large fans. Jesus. Some walked on all fours or had legs that were merely leather strips so that they could only crawl. Some had spider legs or goat feet or bird claws. Some were entirely bald or exceedingly hairy. Some had tails or had the neck as well as the head of a horse or a mouse. There was also a tribe of creatures that had only a head. The rest of the body was lacking. Right? All of these different descriptions of different peoples, man. That's a lot. That's a lot. Right? I can't imagine encountering some of that today. I probably start losing my mind. Because what in the world? Right? How do we bypass all of this in the modern history class of today? How did we leave out all of this? Why do we learn about it in the cartoons and not in the traditional history class? Right? Why leave this stuff out? Right, well, I know a big part of it is they don't want us to figure out that true wild man theory, right? That'll change the course of history for a long time. Right, if all the people of today, especially the kids, knew about the wild man theory, then that means they would understand or know the origins of man. And they would know that we are sharing this planet with people who are not like us, legit. Right? It was understood that monsters had monstrous habits. They were naked, lascivious, promiscuous, and filthy. 7 deadly sins, right? They had a bad smell and no religion. Didn't even clean up. They ate snakes, lizards, dogs, mice, fleas, and flies. They ate their parents, or after fattening them for years, their children. They consumed their own people. Their own kids. The dogs, the mice. Oh my Lord. It's insane, right? The celebrated myth of Prester John lent further credence to fabulous creatures. In the 12th century, There appeared the Latin text of a letter addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Comnenus, and purportedly written by Prester John, ruler of a realm in the east. Prester John professed to be a devout Christian whose land was not enormously wealthy, and for those who don't know about Prester John, go look that man up, harboring not only rich mineral resources but also the fountain of perpetual youth. The inhabitants of the region included, in addition to a normal human population, nearly all of the marvelous and monstrous creatures ever described. Wild men, men with horns, one-eyed men, pygmies, giants, 40 elves about 90 feet, tall centaurs, fawns, and so on. Prester John's land was over here in America, truth be told. The letter was widely accepted as being genuine. European monarchs were eager to discover Prester John's realm, if only to enlist a powerful ally in their struggle with Islam. Pope Alexander III wrote a letter to Prester John and entrusted it to his physicians for personal delivery. The physician never returned. They were trying to make voyages over here to America. Many travelers who later set out to discover this earthly paradise did return, and they gave eyewitness accounts. As late as 1590, an English traveler by the name of Edward Weeble reported that he had visited Prester John's court and had seen a monster there. It was kept chained to prevent from devouring human beings, but after the executions, it was fed human flesh. The geographic location of Prester John's country was variously conceived. At first, it was usually near or in India. Later, it was Abyssinia. The discovery of Cape of Good Hope was due in part of the efforts of the Portuguese to find Prester John's country. Columbus believed he had passed near it. Right, that's one of the things they were looking for. Prester John's land, it was here in America. That's where all the gold was. Cusco, South America. Right, apart from the Prester John myth and the fictitious accounts of travelers, there were many literary sources dealing with monsters. One of the earliest encyclopedic works was Etymologies, written by Isidore of Seville in the 17th century AD. Isidore attempted single-handedly to summarize all knowledge. He devoted a volume to men and monsters, and he placed the monsters in definite geographic areas. This immense popular work was translated into several languages and was often imitated. In the 13th century, a similar work explicitly directed to unlearned people was translated into 6 European languages. With the invention of the printing press, it reached 46 editions. The popularity of monsters is further attested by the fact that the printed pictures of them were often sold at county fairs. Monstrous men are also depicted on the medieval Mappa Mundi, maps of the world, and earlier editions of the fabulous races were drawn on the maps themselves, indicating their supposed geographic distribution. On a late 13th century map in Hereford Cathedral, the Seapodes, pygmies, and giants are found in India and also here in America, right? Can't forget. Horse-hoofed and long-eared tribes in Scythia, and tailed satyrs and the Blemaye in Abyssinia. On later maps, the creatures often appear as bordering decorations, suggesting the direction in which they might be found, right? Check this, just like this, the 1590 map of giants. Right, these exist all over. You can find these maps all over Google. These were real maps published all that time ago, and on some of these maps, you have depictions of giants and sea creatures and stuff like that and whatnot. Right, on these old ancient maps. So what they're telling us is obviously not a lie. They're not lying on half of what they're telling us right now. because they put that stuff on the maps. I'm trying to give y'all more just to give an example, because there's a lot of them. For example, here, look at the men encountering the giants, the wild men, the hairy men. Patagonia. Right, these maps exist. They exist, and they are out there for you to go and literally analyze top to bottom. Right? Yeah, they said that in the Middle Ages, monsters were cited to teach moral lessons. According to one 13th century source, pygmies denoted humility, giants pride, and cynocephalia harshness of temper. The long-lipped races were gossips and mischief makers. In the widely translated Gesta Romanorum, the late medieval collection of moral tales, the symbolism had changed. Long-lipped people now signified justice. Long-eared ones were devout. The headless blemier also represented humility. Right, they're saying that these people were actually kind, these headless people. The question St. Augustine had raised, are the monstrous races human, became a matter of practical concern with the discovery of the New World and its inhabitants. Columbus, convinced to the day of his death that he had found the sea route to India, wrote quite objectively about the Indians of Hispaniola, today Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They were, he said, well-made men who were so generous with their possessions that they never refused anything that was requested. He described the Carib Indians as being handsome of face and figure and intelligent. Shout out them boys. Nonetheless, Columbus also mentions the existence of races that were hairless, tailed, or dog-headed in the Americas. Trying to tell y'all, Prester John's land was here. This was the beautiful land that he was quote-unquote trying to find in India. Right? But all these different, like the British West India Company and all of that, you still ain't find none of that stuff over there yet. However, we had temples, dig me, in Inca Cusco that would contribute to the marvel of this land they get the idea of that belongs to Prester John. Right? They found hairless, tailed, or dog-headed people in America. Dog-headed people. Right? Later explorers less restrained than Columbus maintained that they had personally met Indians who were monstrous both in appearance and habits. It was necessary for Pope Paul II to declare explicitly that American Indians were fully human and in possession of an immortal soul. Many Europeans had the opportunity to examine human representatives of the New World. Captured specimens were shipped to Europe and placed on public display. Some of them, dressed in tiger skins and fed raw meat, were exhibited in cages. Right? They had these mankind people cool it in cages. Right? Even so, it must have been a disappointment to many onlookers that they had no tail, were not very hirsute, and had only 2 eyes, 2 arms, and normal sized ears. They were regular humans, right? So basically, what they were doing was capturing Indians, shipping them to Europe, right? These captured specimens. We know this Indian slavery in South Carolina and stuff like that, in the West Indies and all that. And they was shipping them back to Europe in cages, being put on public display, calling these people the monsters of America, when in reality these people look nothing like the monsters in America. Right? The character Caliban in The Tempest no doubts reflects attitude towards the people of the New World in Shakespeare's time. Caliban is as disproportionate in his manners as his shape, a thing most brutish, a member of a vile race, a monster of the isle with 4 legs. He is filthy and smells like a fish, and one of the European sailors shipwrecked on his island at first mistakes him for a devil. Another sailor calls him a puppy-headed monster. Caliban is said to use the language taught to him by his master, but only to curse. He has no capacity for abstraction and understands neither music nor love. A devil, a born devil on whose nurture can never stick. The name Caliban is an anagram of the cannibal, and this Spanish word itself is a corruption of Caribal. This is where the Caribs or the Caribbean islands even get its name from. In terms suggest cano, Spanish for dog. The Cynocephalia come readily to mind, the more so because the term puppy-headed monster. Shakespeare thus equated the monstrous Caliban with inhabitants of the New World. A further indication that he was thinking of the New World in The Tempest is his mention of the Vex Bermuda. So basically, right, because they think that they got this, they saw dog-headed men, allegedly, they called them cannibal or kino, dogs, flesh eaters, right, puppy-headed monsters. Right, that's new developments now we see, and there's another reason why they gave them that carrot name, not only because of cannibalistic behavior. With the development of modern science in the 17th century, emphasis was placed on systematic study by direct observation. This method was also applied to the study of monsters. The only monsters available for extermination, however, those resulting from abnormal births, in the absence of detailed knowledge in embryology, endocrine glands, and hormones that cause of such births were little understood. Most of the scholarly work dealing with them were a mixture of science and credulousness. Congenital abnormalities were discussed on the same level as the fictitious monstrous races. In his book De Monstris, Fortino Lissetti added an elephant-headed creature to the lengthy catalog of composite beings. Other students of teratology occupied themselves with classifications. They grouped fabulous tribes according to the part of the body that was abnormal. Moral lessons were not lacking. Monstrous births were seen as punishment for deviation from accepted customs, most particularly for incest or promiscuity, but also for a variety of other transgressions. In the 17th century, as increasing numbers of the animal and plant species were being discovered, efforts were made to arrange the species in an orderly array. In some of the earliest systems of classification, the monsters presented no problem. They were simply left out, together with man himself. Linnaeus, however, proposed to classify everything in nature. In the first edition of his System of Nature, which appeared in 1735, he boldly classified man as a quadruped, placing him in the same order as a sloth and the ape. Right? But they not talking about man. They not talking about man. You can't classify man as a sloth or ape. We came about long before the European Pleistocene ape man. So they're not talking about man. We cannot be classified in the same category as ape. Right? At that time, Linnaeus had not introduced his binomial system of nomenclature. He has simply noted that satyrs and tailed men were ape species, right? These other species of wild men, of apes, not mankind. And the 10th edition of Linnaeus, 1758, man was given the name Homo sapiens, and the separate species Homo monstrous was also listed, separating the two. Linnaeus considered the satyrs and pygmies to be closer to the apes, as is indicated by their names. Sima satyrs and Sima salvanos, right? He described a somewhat more human species believed to live in Abyssinia and on Java. They are, he said, nocturnal. They walk erect. They have frizzled white hair. They speak in a hiss. They are able to think they believe the world was made for them. Linnaeus granted that it was extremely difficult to distinguish such creatures from man. It was just difficult, right? Because they blending in now, right? People are blending in. He was, of course, severely handicapped. Not only were there no specimens of monsters, but also he had not seen many apes. The only ape he mentioned as being accessible to him for examination was an immature chimpanzee. At least two followers of Linnaeus continue to classify fabulous tribes in a scientific manner. C.E. Hippolytus, a pupil of Linnaeus, ranked Homo triglodytes closest to man. Next came Homo luciferus, as Hippolytus named human creatures with tails. He was followed by Homo satyrs and Homo pygmaeus. And a German physician named Martinus contended that there were two races of Homo silvestris, the member of one of the race being smaller than those of the other. However, yet none of these are Homo sapien. And just look at the image of the wild man that they got there. Same image that we get from the book, the Wild Man book. This is the same image as the giant on the 1590 map, right? Check out the hair and the beard. You cannot make this stuff up, right? Even if people would try to deny this, there's absolutely a direct link just based off the phenotype alone. You know, so that's these wild men, they was out here too. These the same people that came way after man, right? Way after. But let's continue before we conclude this. Nonetheless, the end of Homo monstrous and his like was approaching. With increased knowledge of anatomy, in particular the anatomy of great apes, it was realized that the stories about satyrs and men with tails, if they were not fantasies, came from faulty observations of apes and monkeys. Although many a 19th century traveler wrote about the tailed men, such reports eventually became rare. The puzzling similarities and differences between men and apes were clarified by Darwin's theory of evolution, right? These people began to evolve. Why is that? Folks was mixing in. Simply, that's it. Doing things that they wasn't supposed to. Right? The erroneous idea that the lineage of man could be traced to known ape species spurred the search for a missing link. A creature half ape, half man. Eugene Dubois believed that he had found such a link, a belief many people shared until the discovery of human fossils changed the picture. With the knowledge that the ancestors of man are not represented among contemporary ape species, the search for links between men and apes ended. They could not find no connection between man and ape. Shot that evolution theory. It is not true. And it's so amazing that reading through a book like this just lets us know this in a nutshell. We don't come from apes. We are different from majority of the people that we see before us. These people are classified outside of Homo sapien. Apes aren't even classified within Homo sapien. They're a totally different type of people. Right? Monsters, Homo monstrous. These are the people who dwelt on this land that were outside of human. Right? The folks who came out the caves and all that. The cavemen, the Neanderthals, the people that they like to claim we come from so much. Right? We come from monkeys. We come from apes. How is that possible? They still haven't even evolved yet to average human thinking. I wouldn't be nervous to think that they would at any point. Right? If that's the case, they would have never even tried to get down with AI. Right? Let's just program all of this inside the monkeys. They the closest thing to humans, right? If we want to take over a world, let's fight fire with fire. However, they can't do that. They're not man. They're a part of Homo monstrous. And we conclude that, man, monsters in the old world. We learned a lot. We learned that these Greek historians, man, they traveled the world and they encountered and met a lot of people. And a lot of these people were very, very, very different from the average you and I. Right? They made their mark in history. And with that being said, they will never be able to give us true history because the truth has been removed from the timeline. Now everything is artificial or fictional. But that ain't it with this history, man. That ain't it. Right? And with that, I want to conclude this one. I appreciate those who decided to tune in. Like, comment, and subscribe, man. This is a really great video. We have a whole series to go through now, man, just to learn about the different peoples and nations of peoples and out humanly creatures and stuff like that that have dwelt on this land. You wouldn't see them today. Right? They in the museums and stuff like that, right? Smithsonian took the bones and the bodies, right? Now you gotta pay to observe. They in the most classified parts of the museum. Dig me? Like I said, man, just want to conclude this one. I love y'all, man. For those who decided to tap in, support, continue to support. We're going to continue to put out good content. We're going to continue to educate. And as of right now, man, we just trying to promote, get some sponsors or collaborations with anybody who may be interested in helping us distribute these coloring books. There's a lot of kids out there that need this information. Right? They're going to change the education system. We don't know what's going to happen. So the proper way to perform would be to prevent poor performance and proceed with love. Like I said, like, comment, and subscribe, y'all. I love y'all. See you on the next one.